Adopt Technology's The Elephant in the Room podcast brings you gigantic tech stories that inspire. These are creators, innovators, and change makers. Every episode, our guests embody one of the core values that makes Adopt so different from every other tech company. Much like an elephant, guests on this show are emotionally intelligent and ready to make a gigantic impact on the world. Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Pena. Thank you so much for joining us. And in studio today, Jenny Poon, a serial entrepreneur and most notably the founder of HUUB, a citywide entrepreneur platform. Before HUUB, she built equitable ecosystems as founder of Co+Hoots, a purpose-driven co-working and entrepreneur center. And your resume is much longer than that, but I just went with the Cliff Notes version. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Carrie.
Let's start first by talking about what HUUB is.
Sure. HUUB is a digital platform that is launched in partnership with municipalities, local governments, to help create more access to the resources that exist in their city. A lot of times, I think small businesses and entrepreneurs don't realize all the resources that exist, or it's just really noisy. It's really hard to find where there are grant opportunities, funding opportunities, where to find experts to get help for what you need. And Google is obviously incredibly noisy. And what's most helpful is actually connecting with resources that are right there down the street and local to you. And so HUUB brings all those pieces together in a digital platform versus, I think traditionally you would be looking up and asking your best friends for who would be good. And if you think about women and people of color that are that were most damaged over this last 2 years from the pandemic, they don't have the networks and the connections to resources that most people that come from generational wealth have. And so this tool really helps them be able to access these resources that exist, grants, on-demand training for small businesses and experts at their fingertips at any time versus waiting during business hours, because we know that small businesses don't actually work on their business during business hours.
Yeah. No time for that.
Yeah, no time. So all of that available for free to them through the support of their city and the city funding these kinds of programs to make it accessible.
You have built two successful platforms now. What's it been like for you being a female founder?
It's fun. It's challenging. I think every day I wake up and I think, gosh, if these things would be different, we would be in a very different place. But at the same time, I think I'm very used to being the trailblazer and starting things. I have another one. I have one daughter and I have another one on the way. And I think that's always like a guiding light of we've gone through a lot as women. There's a lot of policies that exist that were not built for us. But I think we also have the power and the agency to make some changes.
When today. You say if these things were different, What do you mean specifically?
I think some of the biggest challenges as we speak about entrepreneurship and small businesses are around healthcare and insurance, around debt, our education system and debt very tied together. The way that functions with students coming out with over $100,000 in debt for just any kind of degree means that they don't have the ability to take risks to start things. And with that, added to that is the challenge of if you were to become an entrepreneur, the burden of healthcare is on you solely. Whereas if you work for a corporation, that cost is split or fully covered for you. So I think my big push, my dream would be that healthcare becomes universal, but is removed from employment altogether. That if you think about it, the benefit comes from being employed. But what about the people that are entrepreneurs? What about the students that are coming out looking for jobs? What about the unemployed or even the homeless? Do they not deserve to have healthcare? And so to have it all tied and a burden to employers, it creates it creates this huge disparity in people who should, as we speak about healthcare, it should be a universal right? Like a human right that we have. And it's not. So I think that's a big one, because even with our change in healthcare, that cost is easily the cost of, if you have a family to cover, is the cost of a part-time employee. And so to start off going out on your own, you have student loan debts, you have healthcare costs, you have just normal living expenses. If you add all of those things up, you have to be making a minimum of 50, 60 grand, right? Can you do that? Can you make 50 to 60 grand as an entrepreneur within your first month? Very rarely is that possible. And so where do we build a safety net? Because if we're seeing the ratio of people going into entrepreneurship diminish, we become, as a country, non-competitive.
What drives you each day to take a look at these big problems and try to come up with solutions?
I think it comes from growing up in an immigrant family. So my parents came here as refugees from Vietnam, and they came here with nothing, right? Like they came with the clothes on their back, and we were very fortunate to have a family take us in, take my parents in, and I was born in Minnesota. But seeing them go into entrepreneurship, become small business owners, and struggle constantly with things that, as I've grown up and seen, are pretty easy things to solve if they had the right person to talk to, a trusted network, right? Like if they knew how to navigate some of the financial systems that exist, they could qualify for loans. But they went 40 years with the assumption that they would never be able to qualify for loans. But that process is also very complicated and nuanced and also slanted. And so like those things, I think I wake up and I think, gosh, like incredible how far my parents made it with nothing and without knowing the language or knowing how like having to learn how you pay taxes and manage QuickBooks and those kinds of things. They've come very far, but had they had the things that I know now, how much further could they have gone, right? Like, would they still be running at 70 this small restaurant, or would they actually be like building owners and actually managing the property versus paying rent for 40 years, which would have, if you add that up, it's over $4 million. So
accessibility to resources and trusted resources.
Yep.
This podcast is all about diversity in tech.
Sure.
Do you think that there is a lot of growth that we need to have still in this arena?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm in accelerator programs and I'm constantly looking at things to improve myself in this new tech arena that I'm in. And there's not very much that's out there and for women and people of color. And there's definitely a stigma as you go out. I mean, the numbers are there. We all know it, right? Women aren't getting funded as much as men in terms of venture capital. And then if you dig into women and if they're any kind of ethnic minority, that number is an even smaller percentage. And I think one of the bigger things that society likes to tell us is we need more resources. And I don't think actually that's the answer. There are plenty of resources and HUUB, what we've built, is an answer to that. The resources exist. We just need better access to them. I think that applies to the technology space too, that there's a lot of resources out there for us. We need to be better at finding them. The people putting them out need to be better at communicating them. But the third piece is there are systemic issues that are put in place that make it harder. So for example, banking, investment. We purchased a building in 2016 and I had to learn how to do all of that, which is normal, right? Like you have to learn these processes. One thing I didn't fully understand was the concept of how much down payment capital is needed to be able to qualify for loans and how that varies based on how if you don't have enough, how your rate will vary and how you'll be qualified. And if you think about people who come up from either poverty or are people of color and have not built generational wealth, we don't just have 250 grand sitting in our back pocket to throw down as a deposit, right? And so those are challenges which sound very normal, like a bank, right? Like if you're a bank, you want to make sure that your money is going to the right place and that there's collateral involved. But if you think about the people that you're trying to serve and their history of in the workplace in general, or the ability to to have that safety net that we talk about, if that doesn't exist, you're eliminating the possibility for them to be able to grow, right?
Do you feel that there's discrimination against you in this field?
I think there's bias for sure. I've walked into many rooms and it was assumed I was the intern or the receptionist that's here to bring you water. I think there is that will always exist. I don't really know how you change that until I think the only way to change that is to see more of us, right? To normalize that women can be in the room and have these conversations around technology and innovation. Because I think the problem is we just don't see enough of it. So when you just visualize what that room looks like, you typically see all men.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely in the game and you've made a name for yourself in the Phoenix area and you're expanding well beyond Phoenix. Let's back up a second and talk about Co+Hoots and what that was all about when you first went to build it and how excited you've been to see this thing grow.
It's been a journey for sure. We were the first co-working space to open in Phoenix in 2010. And I don't think co-working was a term at that point. When we opened it, we didn't know it was called co-working. We just said, it's going to be a shared workspace where a ton of really creative people are helping each other and we're building things together. As we got going, I stumbled into nationally, there were co-working spaces that exist. Not that many, I think there was 200, but there was a term around it and I followed the people building other co-working spaces and adopted some of their concepts. And, I think it's a very welcoming community, co-working space managers or whatever. But yeah, because I knew that we wouldn't qualify for a loan, because I grew up in this mentality of you kind of have to do this all by yourself until you hit a stride, and maybe then there's another way to grow it. We built Co+Hoots one desk at a time, and it was the middle of the recession, and there were a lot of open spaces that had been sitting empty for a while, and so I negotiated with the landlord to do just this rental share monthly split with him. And
what's next for you? What's your next big goal with your expansion?
I want to take HUUB to more cities. I think every city needs to lean into technology. So much of city operations and functions are done in an archaic way, and it's not driven by data. And until you start to measure and track and work with tracking things, you can't actually develop a good strategy for how you improve your community moving forward. And that's what we've been seeing is a lot of times it's just putting out fires, which we all know what that feels like. But doing that for years and decades, and to look at our government, which is the leadership of our communities, and say, you're trying to help and support people of color, women, people in poverty. You're trying to do that, but you've collected no data on these people. How are you going to do that? So the first stage is actually collecting data and tracking it, which surprisingly not very many cities do that. And when you can start doing that, just like you would in a normal business, you can make sound decisions and improve the lives of a lot of people. But it's a big number. Think of a city that's, the city of Mesa is 500,000, city of Phoenix in its core is over 1 million, and its greater metro is 7 million. And you have 5 to 10 people on your staff to serve that many people.
Right. You need the technology
to scale it.
To work.
Yeah. You need the technology to work. And I think what we've seen is when you're not doing that, you're serving the people you know, and you're serving the people that are that know how to access local government. And who are those people? The same people that have been benefiting from these services for the longest time. Those aren't the people that really need the help the most. And so I think this big pivot and these new investments from the federal government coming down, and the push to really help women and people of color, ideally, if local governments take advantage of this moment, it can be a really big pivotal moment.
Where can people find out more about the work you're doing?
Yeah, so for Co+Hoots, we're opening a Mesa location in Mesa, Arizona. If you want to look at our model for co-working and entrepreneurship as an entrepreneurship center, it's cohoots.com, COHOOTS.com. If you're outside of Arizona and you're looking for more support at the government level, or government wanting to innovate, you can go to HUUB, which is joinhub with 2U's.com. So HUUB.com. Join HUUB, HUUB.com.
Jenny, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
You're doing incredible things. Appreciate you.
Thanks.
And thanks everyone for listening and for watching. I'm Carrie Pena. Now it's time to talk about what we've heard. Ryan Traceman, who is the Chief Technology Officer for Adopt Technologies, here with me in studio. Jenny is such an inspiration. She has led the way, and you all from Adopt Technologies have really been keen on working with people like Jenny who have big vision.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's incredible how the promise of HUUB and what Jenny's created is to connect entrepreneurs, particularly those that haven't traditionally had the access to city programs for funding. And I see a lot of parallels with what we do at Adopt, and connecting our clients with enterprise level technology and security services, particularly where they might be lost without us. And it's difficult to find that all in one place.
Talk about the importance of the work she's doing, driven by data, and how it can really make true impact in communities, especially communities that are underserved.
Jenny spoke a lot about how it's always the same people, who know how the system works, they know how to access the programs, and they're taking advantage of it. And they're not the people who need those programs, right? And so being able to proliferate that among others who have never had access to these resources and don't even know how to find them is extremely valuable. And I think it's a really transformative idea.
What was your main takeaway from the interview?
My main takeaway is that Jenny is awesome, and she's she's doing amazing things, and it's really selfless. She's looking to really help the world, help other entrepreneurs like her. She's recognizing in herself, where she had a hard time finding access to these programs. And so, the idea to be able to give that to others is really wonderful.
Ryan, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for listening and watching. I'm Carrie Pena.